who's loving that his receivers are back. That's Sean McVay. We got to hear from McVay on starting Puka Nacua despite limited practice throughout the week this week.
He went and had a workout session where he ran routes, and did a great job. His movement looked good. I talked to him, and I said, do you want to try to give this thing a shot? And he said, yes. Once you tease me, you're going, all right? And so that was kind of really how that ended up coming about. But he had shown that he was ready for that performance, and this guy's mindset, his mentality, he's a war daddy. He's a stud. I love his play energy and what he brings.
By the way, Connor, just to echo Coach McVay's thoughts there, I can't tell you how many times I've said to my wife, listen, once you tease me, you're going. I mean, it is what it is. I get it. Yep. I get it with McVay and Puka, because I've used that same phrase many, many times. Yeah. And just like Puka Nacua, my wife has met the occasion.
With limited practice.
With limited practice or reps. Yeah, she's a gamer. There's no mystery there. Make no mistake. No mystery is at that. And there's also no mystery about what you're doing with Puka Nacua this week. You are starting him. He is a top 10 play for me. I have him at wide receiver 7 this week. His first game back, 41% of his routes. He was targeted on 41% of his routes. And what's most exciting is they're so good at using him after the catch, right? 49% of his receiving yards, almost half of his receiving yards this year have come after the catch. Important to note that because the Seahawks, they allow the 5th most yards after the catch to per reception to opposing wide receivers. Over the last 4 weeks, in fact, the Hawks have allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So wheels up for Puka Nacua and the Rams offense this week against Seattle.
And the same could be said for Cris Olave. He's got the Panthers. We talked about it with Alvin Kamara, how poor this Panthers defense is right now. Cris Olave, a top 15 play for you, Matthew. 37% target share last week. That was his first full game without Rashid Shaheed. He's the guy in this passing attack, and Derek Carr should be back.
Yeah, which is certainly exciting for the entire Saints offense. Olave should be targeted early and often. He's had 4 different games this year with at least a 25% target share. And as you mentioned, Connor, 37% last week, right, in his first game without Shaheed. So those 4 games where he's gotten at least a 25% target share, he's averaging 17.2 fantasy points per game. And, oh, by the way, let me just look at the schedule here. Oh, it's Carolina. Nothing spooky about that. All the treats for Carolina. You see what I did there? See, I tied in the Halloween theme, Connor. That's what I did.
Pretty good.
Instead of trick, I said treat.
The full-size candy bar of defenses.
Full-size candy bar, exactly, of defenses. It's the bananas. It's the one block down the house where they're just like, the mom comes out with like buckets of stuff. Here, why don't you take a whole pack of candy bars?
Half your knapsack's full when you leave.
Yeah, oh yeah. Here, take more. What you want? I'll give you one of each.
You go put on a different costume and then come back down.
Yeah. That's what this is as well. That's what Carolina is. They're bottom 5 in the NFL in receptions, in yards, and touchdowns allowed on deep passes. We know Derek Carr especially loves to throw it deep to Cris Olave.
Devontae Smith next up here. He's wide receiver 15. Very quietly, Matthew. He's finished as a top 25 wide receiver in 5 of his 6 games this year. The matchup with Jacksonville, they're giving up a ton of receptions through the air.
Everyone was panicking about Devontae Smith like 2 weeks ago, and we were like, last week, going into last week's game, he was on the love list. We said, don't worry about it. It was just a fluky game the week before, and sure enough, had the big game. Cursed his brains out, by the way. I don't know if you saw that on Twitter or if you were too busy analyzing footage.
I don't miss anything online.
No, I know you don't. You're
actually, it's bothering me that I'm here hosting the show. I should be online.
You should be online.
Yeah.
I don't know how you have time to see patients, given how online you are.
I don't. That's the thing. I don't ever see a patient. Right. We're what do they call it? Televisit?
Okay.
Yeah, that's all
you're doing. You're on one screen here and then another, just to make sure you don't miss a tweet. You are Johnny on the spot. There's no question, Dr. Rogers. What I will say is that, so you probably saw Devontae Smith scoring last week and cursing up a storm. He was mic'd up. It's a very funny clip. And he should do that again this week against the Jaguars. They're also bottom 5 in terms of receptions and yards allowed to opposing wide receivers. By the way, they're also, since week 3, tied for the 2nd most touchdowns allowed to the slot. It's worth noting that since Devontae Smith came back in week 6, 54% of his targets has come via the slot. Dallas Goedert banged up. We expect him to line up a decent amount there this week as well. So Devontae Smith, top 15 play for me in week number 9.
We move over to a tight end, and Evan Engram. Since returning from injury, Engram has been targeted on a team-high 27% of his routes, Matthew. This is Trevor Lawrence's consistent guy, his safety blanket. He just needs to be on the field. Now, no, Christian Kirk with the shoulder injury, which, by the way, I diagnosed before anyone else did.
No, you had
online.
that first. You absolutely had that
I
first.
saw that, and I said that is a season-ending shoulder injury. This is going to impact the trade deadline. I told the Baltimore Ravens right away, you have to pivot to Diontae Johnson.
Yeah,
they listened.
Which is smart. Your sources are second to none, Doctor. There's no question about it. You were absolutely first online with that, so credit to you. It's unfortunate major media ignored you.
They did, but I texted you and I said Evan Engram on the love list, no Christian Kirk going forward.
Right, correct. Along with, by the way, as you've also noted, Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. both banged up. We don't know if they're going to be able to play this week. We'll see. But even if they can go, they may be less than 100%. Evan Engram should be the focal point of this Jaguars offense. And since the start of last season, when Engram gets at least 7 targets, and he should obviously get at least 7 targets in this matchup at Philadelphia, he's averaging 15.2 fantasy points per game. And there's 86% of Christian Kirk's targets came from the slot. Why do I bring that up? Because he had an almost 20% target share. So this 20% target share, of which 86% of those targets came from the slot, which is obviously where Engram runs the majority of his routes. Bottom line, there's a lot of targets available for Evan Engram. He should have a big week as an underdog to Philadelphia on the road. He's a top 5 tight end play for me in week 9.
Some others receiving votes, and we'll go through this list one by one. Tank Dell against the Jets on Thursday Night Football tonight. Matthew, makes your top 25 wide receivers. He's the guy. I diagnosed this. Stephon Diggs, unfortunately, torn ACL. That'll cost his season. Nico Collins not eligible to return off of IR. Tank Dell should see a lot of work through the air for the Texans.
Here's the entire list of wide receivers on the Texans that are healthy that have more than 10 targets this year. Tank Dell. That's the list. So he should see a lot of looks tonight against the Jets. And in the 9 games where he's had at least 6 or more targets, he's had at least 17 fantasy points in 7 of them. I am as a top 25 play today. Hey, Josh Downs also makes the other receiving votes list. With the news that comeback player of the year, Joe Flacco, is now the starting quarterback of the Colts. That is good news. In the 3 games that he's played with Joe Flacco, he's had at least 7 receptions in all of them, a 27% target share, averaging over 19 fantasy points per game. As long as Flacco's under center, Josh Downs is a top 20 player. He's a wide receiver, too, as well. It's also a nice matchup against the Vikings, as Minnesota is bottom 5 in terms of receptions and yards given up to the slot, which is where Downs runs a lot of his routes. Jacoby Myers, he's played 3 games without Devontae Adams, 25% target share. He's going to get a ton of looks. Khalil Shakir is very quietly getting a ton of looks from Josh Allen. Over the last 2 weeks, almost a 27% target share, Connor, and he's had double-digit fantasy points very quietly in every game this year but 1. So while Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper battle it out on the outside, Shakir's getting the underneath stuff.
He absolutely is. He's been the consistency in that offense where it's been a lot of highs and lows for their wide receivers. Sam Laporta makes the love list, Matthew, a top 12 tight end here, tight end 11 for you. First game without Jameson Williams, a season-high 33% target share. They looked for him in some trick plays. Listen, Laporta has not met expectations this year, but a lot of tight ends haven't. It feels like this could be a big second half for him.
Yeah, and it's a nice matchup with the Packers. 3 of the last 4 weeks, they've given up at least 12 fantasy points to an opposing tight end. So you see, yes, they're getting Laporta more involved. No Jameson Williams. This is an important matchup in the division, so expect Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson to pull out all the stops. And they're going to need big games from everyone to beat the Packers. That includes Sam Laporta. Top 12 play for me this week.
We go over to the hate list led by new Baltimore Raven Diontae Johnson. We always see some guys take a little while to get assimilated into their new offense. On top of that, Matthew, Denver, his matchup is allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season.
It's a bad matchup. We have no idea what his role is going to be. You think about Amari Cooper in his first game with the Bills. He ran 12 routes. DeAndre Hopkins, his first game with the Chiefs, he ran 14 routes. So now you've got Diontae Johnson going to the Ravens the same week. He's not going to know very much the playbook. And unlike Cooper and Hopkins, they have I guess you could say this with Cooper on some level, but I would argue that Diontae Johnson goes to a team with more loaded talent than either of the previous 2 guys I just mentioned in terms of
run game.
With a run game, the multiple tight end sets they run, having both Andrews and Isaiah Likely out there, Zay Flowers getting some love. Obviously, you've got Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar still gets a couple looks.
Week,
yeah, I mean, so there's just so many mouths to feed. So honestly, I'm not crazy about Diontae Johnson for this week. He's outside my top 45 for the week. But more importantly, he's also like, just as we look, I know you guys talked about the trade yesterday. I posted something on social media just as a reaction. I was off yesterday. But so you can go check that out if you want at Matthew Berry TMR on all forms of social media. But I will say that if you missed that real quickly, like, hate this for fantasy for Diontae Johnson. They have a lot of mouths to feed. He was getting a 27% target share with the Panthers. I don't think there's any way he gets close to that with the Ravens. And despite having a significant upgrade in quarterback and offensive efficiency, scoring opportunities, there's just so many mouths to feed in that Ravens offense. Diontae Johnson will, by the end of the year, have a couple of big games with the Ravens. Just trying to figure out when those are going to be is going to be hard, and I think this hurts Zay Flowers as well.
We had an interesting debate about that yesterday. We were trying to decide who's the receiver you'd rather have for the rest of the year. Is it Zay Flowers, who gets a lot of the scheme touches, a lot of screens, or Diontae Johnson, who's a more natural route runner right now? In fantasy, who do you think has a better chance to have the bigger output?
I'm still going to say Zay Flowers.
Yeah,
I think they're both really. I think they're all really talented, but Zay's been there. He knows the offense, and to your point, they scheme touches for him.
Monken loves him, clearly.
Yeah. So, and there's obviously a connection with Lamar, and so Diontae Johnson, another weapon for Lamar Jackson. It's exciting for the Ravens and for Lamar, but you went from having a locked-in kind of top 20 wide receiver to now like who's on the wide receiver 3-4 border range. That's just sort of like, does he score this week? It's much more volatile.
Calvin Ridley next up on our hate list here. He's outside the top 30 wide receivers. Yes, he had the monster game with Mason Rudolph last week. It's no guarantee Rudolph starts. Also, Christian Gonzalez will most likely shadow him in this game.
Yeah, shout out to my friend Mike Clay, who does a great job with his wide receiver cornerback matchups. He's expecting a shadow on Christian Gonzalez. I expect that to be the case as well. You think about some of the wide receivers that have faced Christian Gonzalez. Jamar Chase, Brandon Ayuk, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, all had under 70 receiving yards against Christian Gonzalez. And so Calvin Ridley, who's caught only 33% of his targets from Will Levis this year. We're not really sure as of this taping who's going to start for Tennessee, but it might be Will Levis. Either way, whether it's Mason Rudolph or Will Levis, just doesn't. I know there's really encouraging signs from Calvin Ridley last week because of the production and the usage and just getting all the looks. And I do think that will be more the norm going forward. But this week he's outside my top 30. Just too tough a matchup and just not a ton of confidence in the passing game. I think they go run heavy, which is one of the reasons why we mentioned Tony Pollard earlier in the show.
Yeah, New England's run defense, they've been one of the worst in football against outside zone. That's Tony Pollard's bread and butter. So I'm with you. I love the run game, hate the pass game for them. Jordan Addison, next up on our hate list. This is one of the most jarring stats of the entire fantasy season, Matthew. He's yet to have a game with more than 3 catches this season.
Yeah.
They drafted him in the first round a little over a year ago.
Is he Jordan Addison or is he Jordan Dropperson?
Oh!
Hey-oh! You see what I did there?
That's a zinger.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Yep. Even Fred on Scooby-Doo couldn't come up with that with his limited
Ruh-roh. Anyway, yeah, Jordan Addison. He's had one game this year with a 20% target share. Oh, by the way, that's without TJ Hawkinson, who's expected to return this week. Remember, TJ Hawkinson had a 24% target share for these same Vikings as well, so they're going to want to get Hawk involved. You already heard me talk up Aaron Jones. We expect him to touch the ball a lot. Obviously, Justin Jefferson's going to get him. We've seen some, a couple of moments here from Jalen Naylor, which is nice as well. And so the Colts, feels like the way you attack Indianapolis is on the ground. They're actually top 10 over the last month. They're top 10 in terms of fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. Some of that's because they're playing well in the secondary, honestly, but some of that's because teams aren't throwing against the Colts because they can just run on them. And that's what I expect to happen here. I think it's a lot of Aaron Jones. I think they get Jefferson and Hawkins in theirs, but Jordan Addison outside my top 40 for the week.
Tucker Kraft, our tight end here on the hate list. Detroit's allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends, Matthew. This is also a team, a Packers offense, that we don't know the status of Jordan Love.
Right.
And they love handing the ball off anyway.
They do. I mean, you'll see a decent amount of Josh Jacobs here, but whether it's Malik Willis or Jordan Love under center, and by the way, here's something that makes me nervous. It could be both. Jordan Love is sitting there talking about how he thinks he might be able to go. I know you have a diagnosis as to whether he can go or not.
Yeah.
You've
I already gave the Packers my full written report.
Right, exactly.
Whether they actually listen to me.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, or maybe you're not surprised. Many teams do go by my reports.
I'm sure, of course.
Consultation.
I know. You just don't want to reveal it online.
No, I have to sign an NDA with the teams.
100%. So we'll wait to see what the Packers do with your recommendations here. But whether it's Jordan Love or Malik Willis, the fact is it easily could be both. There's a chance that Jordan Love starts the game and then re-aggravates, and then Malik Willis comes in. It's just hard to say either way. Hard to get excited about Tucker Kraft. I know he's been a tight end one this season, and maybe you don't have a better choice because the position is so gross. But 3 straight games now with a target share lower than 13%. It's not a good matchup against Detroit, right? Lions allow the second fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. They have allowed 35 yards to a tight end once this season. That's it. Only one tight end has gotten over 35 yards against the against the Lions this year. And so with Tucker Kraft, he's just basically very touchdown dependent, which he could do. I mean, he's definitely scored some this year, but you'd feel better about it if Love was in there, not Willis. There's no guarantee, even if Love starts, that he finishes the game. So outside my top 12 for the week, Tucker Kraft. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.